listening to a Bio-Reset Medical Podcast with Dr. Cook. If you have questions or want to talk more about your symptoms and issues, you can always reach us at 650-888-7950. You can find this podcast and others on iTunes, Spotify, and on bioresetpodcast.com.
Welcome to the show, everybody. I'm sitting at my kitchen table here with the wonderful Matt Cook. You don't have any smoothie on your face. How's my face look?
You look red.
Is it clean?
Yeah.
Did you like that smoothie?
You look like the face of God and the voice of God.
The voice of God. The deep, we've established possibly male, booming voice. Matt and I have been geeking out all morning. What have we done so far this morning? Before I tell people the smoothie recipe, we got up, we did vibration foam roller and the 5 Tibetan longevity exercises.
That was awesome.
And a bunch of body work.
Yep.
And then we both did the full body Juve light. But to get our circadian rhythms going, we did the retimer glasses,
the ear things,
and the human charger. So we got the circadian rhythms going because it's kind of gray here in Spokane, a rainy day. So we wanted to get a blast of both near infrared and red light, but then also the regular sunlight exposure. Mm-hmm. And then Matt did some pulsed electromagnetic field therapy on his back,
which was amazing.
Did you like that move?
That was awesome.
Yeah, this opener that I have, and if you guys are listening, I have this one on YouTube. You lay on this pulsed electromagnetic field pad, and you kind of like move your hips back and forth, then flip over and do the same thing on the front side. Just releases all of the low back and the hip muscles and the psoas.
It's amazing because when you do the PEMF, when you roll over onto your side, you feel it hit the psoas and the iliopsoas.
Yeah. As
you're rolling, and it's like crazy how intense that is.
Yeah, it's a really great move for the hips. And Matt's pouring himself a little French press. Then we did a nature walk where we worked on vagus nerve activation by keeping our eyes really wide open and using the peripheral vision as we walked through the forest, and did a lot of deep breathing in through the nose to awaken the senses, and kind of kept the ears open. And then we walked in silence for a while through the snow, which is a really great way to just kind of connect to nature in the morning. We were talking about when I'm at home, I always do typically the sauna with a cold pool or go on a walk, just because I like to ease myself kind of parasympathetically into the day, and then go crush the gym later on in the day. And so we've done all that, and then we had a smoothie.
We had a hot tub.
Oh, and then we jumped in the hot tub. Yeah, so
which was amazing.
We had planned on starting to record this podcast for you in the wee hours of the morning. It's already noon. just getting started. What was in the smoothie? Well, let's see. The base. So there's always like a base, right? Sometimes it's bone broth. Sometimes it's coconut milk. But lately, what I've been using is I have camel's milk. I order camel's milk from I think it's just called the Camel's Milk Company down in California. So it doesn't have the inflammatory A1 protein that cow's milk has. It's all A2 protein. And what I do is I've got these kefir grains, and I ferment the kefir grains in camel's milk for about 24 to 36 hours. I just kind of give it a taste as it goes, and when it gets mildly sour, that's a good sign that the kefir grains have digested any lactose sugars and basically fermented to create this wonderful probiotic-rich compound that's got L-reuteri in it. I found this out recently, it specifically causes the production of collagen peptides when you consume kefir. And so you're actually producing your own peptides in the gut when you create this kefir, when you drink this kefir. So that was the base we used, but I mixed the kefir up with a bunch of colostrum. So I put a bunch of colostrum from these grass-fed goats into the camel's milk kefir, and that was the base of the smoothie. And then to that, we added some organic raw cacao powder from Addictive Wellness to give it those theobromines and dopamines. Added a few scoops of the Organifi Super Greens powder. We put some creatine in there, not only because we're trying to get swole, but also for the little nootropic effect that creatine can give you. We put a really potent antioxidant in there called C60. It's C60 in olive oil.
Ian.
And for those of you who don't know what C60 is, go and listen to my podcast with Ian Mitchell. And I'll link to all this stuff I'm talking about if you guys go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI reset, because our whole podcast, or a lot of our podcast today, is going to be about the gut. So bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI reset.
I love him, by the way. He's like super great.
Ian Mitchell. Yeah. So we had C60 in there with the camel's milk and the greens and the cacao powder. And then I put a little bit of Ceylon cinnamon in there to kind of stabilize the blood sugar. A little bit of organic stevia. I get this wonderful stevia from Omika Organics to give it a little bit of sweetness. We put a little bit of this nut butter in there. That's a blend of flaxseed, chia seed, almond, and pumpkin. So we had this nut butter in there. And then before blending, was there anything else I threw in there? I think those were the biggies. And then after blending, or you add a bunch of ice, right, so I get like this thick ice creamy texture you can eat with a spoon. So, I remember the last thing I put in there for texture, organic pumpkin mash, which is wonderful as like a secondary base for a smoothie. So we've got like those 9-10 different ingredients in there. Then we blend it all up and we topped it with organic dark chocolate chunks and unsweetened coconut flakes for a little bit of texture. And that was it. That was breakfast.
That's the manna of heaven.
We would have had to have paid like $50 for that at a coffee shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's fun to make these things. I love making my morning smoothie. And it's always
I think I love
different.
watching you make it more than you love making it. So
yeah, it's a ton of fun. So anyways, though, so to give you guys some background on this podcast, first of all, Dr. Matt Cook, my guest on today's show, this officially, once this episode is released, will make him the most, what would you call it, the most frequent guest on the Ben Greenfield Fitness Show of all time.
Nice.
Yeah, because this will be your 5th podcast you've done with me. And we have covered in the past everything from ketamine to vagus nerve resets to ozone therapy to placental matrix and peptides. Like Matt and I have covered a ton of stuff in previous episodes, and I'm going to link to all of our previous episodes if you guys just want to geek out. If you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI reset, on about a quarterly basis, I actually fly down to San Jose and I go see Matt at his clinic, and he geeks out on me for like 2 to 3 days with all these new protocols. And he occasionally comes up to my house too. And right now he's got a suitcase full of, ultrasound imaging stuff. So we're going to do like ultrasound imaging and nerve Hydra Dissection on the go later on this afternoon. So we might shoot some
right on the kitchen table,
some videos for you guys. But Matt is the founder of Bioreset Medical, and it's a whole regenerative medical clinic just doing a ton of things that you've probably never before seen in a facility, but he combines that with functional medicine and self-quantification and even some things to treat PTSD and trauma like ketamine. And so he's got all these different things going on at his facility, and he also advises a bunch of different medical companies. He does physician training programs. He works with sexual performance optimization as well, which we're going to touch on today for those of you who have no interest in the gut whatsoever. But I was down in San Jose about 5 months ago, and I had what's really a difficult conversation for me, because you guys, for those of you listening in, just so you know, it's sometimes hard for me being a person that people look up to as a guy who's supposed to be the icon of health, who's supposed to present this perfect picture of himself to the world, to admit that he's having health problems. And for the past 2 years, I have increasingly, and I spelled this out to Matt about 6 months ago, I have increasingly been dealing with gut issues like bloating and gas in the afternoons, and even like low back and hip pain that seems to be related to some type of inflammation going on in the gut, and just a change in my bowel movement patterns. And it's been kind of humbling for me, because I'm supposed to have everything figured out, right? Like I'm supposed to be the perfect icon of health. And and I talked to Matt, and I was just like, dude, can we look at this and see if maybe you can identify what's going on? And we found some really interesting things that a lot of other people deal with too, which is why we wanted to record this podcast for you. B, Matt came up with some very unique protocols that he's turning into this entire system for resetting and rebooting the gut that I thought you all would be really interested in. And I really think those are the two main things, A and B. Those are the two things we came up with. And so what you're going to learn today, in addition to some of the discussions Matt and I will have later on about what he's doing for sexual performance optimization and for PTSD and some of these more cutting edge protocols he's doing, like ozone dialysis, which is absolutely amazing. What you guys are going to learn is how to figure out what's going on in your gut when you have these type of issues related to things like mold, mycotoxins, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, biofilm, and that's just a preview of all the shit literally that's going on in my gut right now. And you're going to learn how to kiss that goodbye with a specific protocol that Matt has designed to be able to go after some of this stuff. So did I set us up pretty well, Matt?
Yeah,
to dig in?
You couldn't have done any better.
Okay. All right. So that's where we're at, folks. So A, Ben is having health issues. B, a lot of people are struggling with these same issues, and Matt's seeing this over and over again in his clinic. And C, we're going to talk about not only what to do about it, what you can do about it, but also some other really cool advanced health concepts that Matt's working at. So to begin, Matt, guy like me comes to you, dude, doc, stuff's going on in the gut. What do you do? What do you look at? How do you quantify?
So that's so awesome that you're sort of talking like this, because I think that what is happening with you is probably one of the most common presentations that's an antecedent to all big problems. And so when people start to have problems in their intestines, mm-hmm. that's where your entire immune system is. And then that creates immune system dysfunction. And then that creates inflammation and stress throughout the body that can begin to start to affect other organ systems. And so, based on what I found, it's kind of surprising how amazing. It's amazing that you have the voice of God and the face of God.
I think the way you put it to me was that the fact that I'm still put together based on what's going on in my gut, the fact that I'm even like getting out of bed in the morning and traveling all over the world and doing what I'm doing, it's probably just all these biohacks and stuff that I'm doing.
Because you're totally dialed in,
right.
But you're totally dialed in downstream.
Right.
And so then I'll dig in. So then what I said, and I thought, oh, this is going to be super easy because he's super healthy. And so I have to admit, I took it only semi-seriously. But then what we did is we did some very advanced stool testing, and we did stool testing. And the first thing that I do is I do stool testing with multiple different companies, because often one company may miss something and they use different techniques to look at it. And then I also have someone who looks at your stool with a microscope, and then they go in and they look for trophocytes and they look for cysts and they look for parasites, particularly under the microscope.
And which test was that?
That was the stool test.
That was the Genova Diagnostics?
No, that was the Echo University stool test.
It's called an Echo University stool test.
And so then that's kind of a boutique one that we actually just mail it to this doctor, Dr. Ibrahim, who's a famous parasitologist. Mm-hmm. But then what we found is that you had roundworm.
I'm going to brace everybody. Brace yourself. This is everything we found in my gut. And remember, like for the past 20 years, I've been doing everything from swimming in sewage-filled water and triathlons in Thailand to walking barefoot through the streets of Bangkok to all sorts of crazy stuff. So this was incredibly surprising to me. But go ahead and dig in, Matt.
So you had 2 roundworms, and then you had an amoeba. So you had 3 parasites, and I had seen Giardia in you in the past. Mm-hmm. So you had 4 parasites. And that's kind of, it's almost like an occupational hazard of your lifestyle. So you were probably always going to pick those up. And what those tend to do is they tend to burrow into the wall of your intestine and your small intestine. Mm-hmm. And then they tend to create a biofilm around them. And so then now they're just living there, and food's being washed down, but they create this biofilm that looks kind of like pond scum that protects them from being washed away. And then they have life cycles where 2-week life cycles where sometimes they're in a cyst form, sometimes they're active. And so it's hard to kill them because if you kill them today, some of the cyst forms are isolated and protected, and then they come back out. And so
this is like something out of the movie Aliens.
It's kind of like it, yeah. And honestly, if it goes long enough, they start to burrow all the way through the intestines and cause mass problems.
Wow.
And so then you had 4 parasites, and
for me, considering this has been going on for like about 2 years, these things have had a lot of time to do some damage.
Right. And so then when I see that much stuff going on, and when I hear people having symptoms, I begin to think, oh, is mold involved in this? Mm-hmm. Because whether it's Lyme, whether it's GI things, if somebody has mold illness plus Lyme or mold illness plus parasites presents differently. And so then it takes us down a different sort of algorithm. And so I did a test where I looked to see if you had mycotoxins in your urine, which you had a lot of. Mm-hmm. And then I did a test.
And which test is the
That was the Great Plains.
That's a Great Plains urine test.
Mold urine test.
Okay.
And then I did a test that Andrew Campbell, who's one of the smartest mold guy in the country, and you should have him on your podcast. And we did the MyMyco. And the MyMyco looks to see if your immune system...
And that's a blood test.
Is exactly. And it's a test of antibodies to see if your immune system is making antibodies to mold toxins. Mm-hmm. And mycotoxins are basically a byproduct that mold makes when it divides. And so you had incredibly high levels of mycotoxins. Or mycotoxin antibodies floating around in your bloodstream.
Very. You sent me over the results, and like it was lit up like a Christmas tree.
Yeah. A moldy Christmas tree.
A moldy Christmas tree.
Yeah. So then, and then the final thing that you had is a couple things. You had low bifidobacterium, which is an important part of your immune system, mm-hmm. In terms of the microbiome analysis, and then you had Candida. And what happens is when there are parasites and immune dysregulation, and the immune dysregulation in the gut comes from the combination of the parasites and then that mold. Mm-hmm. Because what happens with the mold is that your immune system is looking for the mycotoxins, but it can't get all the way into the intestine where the mold actually is living in that biofilm. And so then the immune system ends up being really stressed. And so then what happens is you get Candida. And Candida is yeast. And that only shows up as an opportunistic infection when other things are going on.
Okay. All right. So we're talking about roundworms, huge levels of mold and mycotoxins, probably a biofilm, Candida albicans, and... There was one other thing. It showed high levels of GI inflammation, which is no surprise, and then low levels of the bifidobacterium, low levels of the lactobacillus. So just essentially like a storm in the gut. When you look
and 1 gram-negative bacteria.
1 gram-negative bacteria, and usually something like this would start with, for example, a parasite, or start with mold and mycotoxin, or is it one or the other that this typically starts with for people?
The way that I think, so if you step back, usually there's one thing that happened, and in your case, I predict you've been running around and being adventurous, mm-hmm. and as a result, I think you picked up the parasites.
Right.
That led to the biofilm, and then you got exposed to a little bit of mold. Mm-hmm. Some people will work in a mold damaged building. Mm-hmm. And so then they're breathing it in, and then that was their initial thing. If they also had a parasite, then that they'll have a respiratory effect from breathing it in as well as a GI.
Right.
But if they don't, they may not have any effect on their GI. Other people may be eating a lot of mycotoxins and then and mold, and they could get it in that way. But I think you probably picked it up somehow, but it was the mold probably came after the parasites, and then the combination of those two things created basically stress for your immune system, and then you just haven't been able to get past it.
Right. Okay. So once you've established that, so just to summarize for people, we did a MyMyco blood test, which looks at antibodies that would be produced if you'd been exposed to mold and mycotoxins. A Great Plains Laboratory mycotox urine test, and that one looked at, again, what?
That looks at the mycotoxins.
At the actual mycotoxins themselves.
And so then, and how to think about that is if you've seen a piece of bread and you see the green that's the mold.
Okay.
And then what happens is mold releases these little toxins that are neurotoxins and have a whole bunch of negative effects in general and on our immune system and create inflammation. And those are nanoparticles that the mold releases, but they're not actual mold. And so then if you have mold living in you and it's secreting those mycotoxins, what your body is reacting to is the mycotoxin, but it's not actually reacting to the mold. Although it may actually, the mold in the biofilm can be having an inflammatory effect as well.
Right, and that's what the urine test is showing. Then finally, the stool analysis which looked at like the yeast, parasites, fungus, things like that,
and bacteria.
You
basically you everything you could have, you had. So you had the Happy Meal,
which is crazy. I had the Happy Meal. Hooray for me! All right, yay! All right. So once you gather this data and you find this stuff out about what's going on in the gut, and I realize that we'll rabbit hole a little bit as we go through this. And again, for those of you who are trying to keep up, I'm going to be spelling all this out too at bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI reset. Once you find all this stuff out, then what's the protocol? Where do you go from there?
So then the most important thing is to try to get a sense then of who's the person. And so I'll have two people show up in my office, and this is so sort of awesome to kind of wrap your head around with these same things. I'll have one person who can barely get out of bed and is sick as a dog and has like 45 things going on. And that's because they didn't do any of the biohacking stuff that you do. And their detox pathways aren't working. Nothing else is working. And they have this.
Right.
So that's
and they also possibly do not live in as clean an environment as I tend to spend a lot of my time in here at our pristine compound. But then, at the same time, who knows how many condos, Airbnbs, hotel rooms, apartments, in the other half of my life I live throughout the world, getting this stuff aggravated by.
Right. So then the other one is you. And so then the goal is to start to onboard a series of things that I put in the category of GI detox. And so in broad terms, I need to do something that's an antimicrobial that's going to kill things. In broad terms, I have to do something that is going to break down that biofilm. And then in broad terms, I have to start to restore and reset your microbiome, the balance of the good and bad bacteria. And then I specifically, you have to go back to the beginning. Where did this all start? And I think this all started with the parasites. And so we need to fix that because that is what's causing you these symptoms in the afternoon.
Okay, got it. Meaning like the increasing amount of gas, bloating, et cetera, that builds up throughout the day. With really, for me personally, having messed around with everything from a carnivore diet to a low Fodmap diet to, all sorts of different protocols to see if I could control this, the only thing that eliminates the gas and bloating is pure, straight up water fasting, which of course is not sustainable for life, especially for a very active guy like myself.
Right. And so then before we kind of walk through treatment, let's chat a little bit about Sibo.
Okay.
Because I think that's super useful in the perspective of this.
Because this is very common.
This is super
especially
common.
Even if people don't have, say, roundworm or candida, the Sibo thing is quite common.
The Sibo thing.
Spell that out for people.
So Sibo stands for SIBO, which is Small Intestinal Bacterial Overgrowth.
Okay.
And so then in big terms, and I'm just trying to kind of think about this, the food goes from your stomach into the small intestine, and the small intestine is the size of my pinky, but it's 30 feet long.
Okay.
Divided into 3 parts.
Meaning it is the diameter.
The diameter of so it's tiny.
Right.
And
that's smaller than I think a lot of people think. I think some people think it's like more like a garden hose, but it's about the diameter of the pinky.
The inside's kind of like the diameter of the pinky. Okay. It's real small. And then the colon is the size of your biceps. It's Gunjo.
Yeah. It's a good size colon.
It's a good size colon. Yeah. And so then what happens...
So are you saying that people's poops should be as big as their biceps?
They should be about...
in which case I'd have some pretty damn big shits.
It would be...
Because I got me some guns.
You're going to. Yeah. When I'm done with you, you're going to.
Okay, wonderful.
So then what happens is the small intestine's sterile. So there's not supposed to be any bacteria, yeast, fungi, parasites, nothing in there. However, things can attach and start living in there. So you can have a parasite that can start to live there. The other thing that can happen is some bacteria could go on a road trip from the colon and come up and start to live there. They're trying to get ahead in the food line.
Okay.
And so if there's bacteria living in there, we call that small intestinal bacterial growth or overgrowth. Mm-hmm. And so now yeast can also be living in there. Now, what happens if you feed sugar to bacteria or yeast?
It's going to multiply. It's going to that's their food.
But the way they eat it is they ferment it.
Right.
And so then if bacteria or yeast ferment sugar in your small intestine, which is the size of my pinky, what that does is that creates gas and bloating.
Right. And I don't want to derail you here from the explanation of Sibo, but I think a lot of people, and I realized this after I did some digging, don't realize that even meat can ferment to a certain extent. Yeah. And so this is not something where you can just switch to like a carnivore diet and necessarily get rid of the potential for bacterial fermentation, especially by some of the sulfur-producing bacteria.
Right. And how I think about, I'm kind of liking how I'm thinking about this too lately, is that just like there's a spectrum of autism and Asperger's, or there's all of these different spectrums of health conditions, I think there's a little bit of a spectrum in terms of Sibo. So some people can have a little bit of overgrowth. Some people have a ton of overgrowth of bacteria or yeast. Now, if I've got this thing that's the diameter of my pinky and I've got bacteria making gas in there, then that gas starts to distend the wall. And then if it distends the wall, it creates leaky gut. And if it creates leaky gut, all of a sudden little bits of undigested food or other things that are in the biofilms in there start to get into the bloodstream. And now your immune system sees undigested gluten or undigested corn and goes, oh my God, I'm being attacked, because it doesn't know the difference because it's not used to having undigested proteins in the blood. And then that creates immune dysregulation with food allergies, and that's like a whole another thing.
So you're saying that in Austin Powers' Fat Bastard, who says, I've got pieces of corn in my crap bigger than you. Basically, somebody with distension and Sibo has pieces of corn in their blood.
Yeah, Fat Bastard had Sibo.
Yeah. Fat Bastard had Sibo.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
Good.
So then now what I would say is that you've had a couple Sibo breath tests that were very mildly positive, and because in your lifestyle you eat a very small amount of sugar and you eat a relative carnivore diet, and you're doing everything to kind of minimize the amount of sugars that come in and having a pretty low glycemic diet, you have some bacteria that are kind of got into the house party that's going on in the biofilm that you have that has parasites and mold. But it's not overwhelming, and so your symptoms are not as bad as they could be. If you ate sugar and went to McDonald's every day, you would have horrible Sibo.
Right.
And
that's backed up by the fact that if I do include fermentable foods in my diet, and this can just be a self-test for people with probably the two biggest fermentable foods in a FODMAP type of protocol being onions and garlic, right? The very, very worst that I have felt in the past 6 months was when I took my kids to Dubai, where we were eating, tahini and garlic and onions and all these fermentable foods on these Mediterranean plates. And I literally would have a balloon in my stomach every afternoon. And so if that describes you and you're listening in, especially if you do garlic and onions, and it's funny because when this first started a couple years ago, one of my favorite things to do at the Whole Foods salad bar was get the roasted garlic, and I would get a rotisserie chicken and some sweet potatoes, but I'd always put like a giant few tablespoons, probably like 12 garlic cloves in, along with the potatoes and everything, and I would just be a balloon afterwards. And so if you eat garlic and onions and get this kind of bloating, it's a pretty good sign that you probably struggle with some type of a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth.
Right. And so then the thing that you can do that's almost like a home run for this is to go on to a low FODMAP diet. And one of them is called the specific carbohydrate diet. One of them is called the GAPS diet. There's a bunch of different sort of just dietary approaches. And what I like to say is if you imagine that biofilm is like a castle, we got to starve them out to some extent. And so in general, a good strategy is to avoid those fermentable things, avoid vegetables that are high in sugar, and avoid all fruits while you're kind of going through this. And to the extent that you do that, often that starves them. The only caveat that I'll say is sometimes if you are going to, and we'll kind of work our way through this, if I'm giving you things that are going to start to kill the bacteria and the parasites and the Sibo, then it's okay to give them a little bit of sugar right before you do that, because it's kind of like chumming the water. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to bring them out, and then we're going to just kill them.
Okay. All right. So that's what Sibo is. For those of you who want the brief overview of Sibo. Now, let's get into what this systematic protocol is that you use, because there's a lot of little pieces of it, and I think it's important that people understand, because this information is out there. I know that you can't just do something like, a tincture of oil of oregano in the morning and the evening, or just go low FODMAP, or perhaps just take some kind of anti-parasitic medication. There's this entire step-by-step protocol that you've created, and I want to hear more about what that is, if you can walk people through this.
Okay. So then first we're going to have to look at this and get a sense of the severity. And when the first point to make is that when I see something this complex and this many parasites, I made a decision that we're going to go for drugs to kill the parasites in addition to my protocol.
Okay.
And so I'm doubling down on fixing this, but generally, and most of the time, I go with herbal and natural approaches, and I start with 2 or 3 things at a time. Or if people are sick, I'll start with 1 at a time, and I'll onboard them to that, and then work my way through. And so then the first thing that I'll start with is an Immunoglobin Protect, which is it's bovine immunoglobins, and these are immunoglobins from cows, and these are basically like antibodies, and they bind on to gram-negative bacteria, which you have. They'll bind onto parasites, and it's like a very rarefied version of colostrum. Uh-huh.
Because that's what colostrum has in it, is a lot of those immunoglobulins. Yeah. But you'd rather use that than colostrum.
Well, so for the sickest, almost nobody who's sick will react to that. Mm-hmm. Even some people will react to colostrum. And so that's like my 1.0. Colostrum's an amazing 2.0 to add on. Mm-hmm. And so then I'll work my way through that part of the program.
Obviously, because your skin is just glowing from the tablespoons and tablespoons you just had of that.
I know.
In your smoothie.
Yeah. If you're the face of God, amazing. I'll be the face of Jesus.
There we go.
So then the next thing is to start to break down those biofilms, and I will start to add in Biofilm Busters. Now, the issue is I'm trying to break down these biofilms. I've got 5 or 6 different strategies and different products and different companies that I use. And sometimes when you start to give people Biofilm Busters, they will start to have detox reactions because you're killing, and then the bacteria that are, or the yeast that are living in there, or parasites, will start to activate and grow and try to recreate it. And so, so then digestive enzymes, which I've been having you take, which really haven't been that helpful, but I got you going on the protocol, and the 2 that I like the most is serapeptidase and Baluch.
Okay.
And
what are these enzymes? Because most people will think of digestive enzymes as something you'd use to digest fats or proteins or carbohydrates, depending on the specific enzyme prior to a meal, but they can also be used therapeutically to break down biofilms?
Yeah.
When taken on an empty stomach, or do you take them with a meal?
You're going to take them on an empty stomach if you want them to break down the biofilm.
On the biofilm, not in the food, because that's important for people to know. They can't just continue their digestive enzyme protocol, taking it right before a meal. You'd instead, because I've been doing is on an empty stomach in the morning and in the evening, beginning to use enzymes.
Right. And so those enzymes are important parts of so many different protocols for different organ systems, and people use them for cancer. It's but when those digestive enzymes go down through the stomach and then they go into the small intestine where that biofilm is, they start to break up that biofilm just like they would break up food. So they're going to break up the collagen and the biofilm. And so we've got those 2. There's one. The next one that is the lauricidin, which has monolaurin in it, and monolaurin is a fantastic biofilm buster that does not cause much flare.
Now, lauricidin, is that related to the lauric acid that you'd find in something like coconut oil?
Yeah.
Which some people will use as an antiviral or antibacterial?
Yeah, so it's very...
So this is an extract of that you could use without, for example, the calorie punch of just consuming a bunch of coconut oil.
Exactly. And so you get... you get a little bit of an antimicrobial effect from that, but then you're also getting a biofilm busting component to that. Okay. Interesting. The stevia that you put in our drink has some biofilm busting effects too, by the way.
I knew that when I put it in there. I said sweetness, but I really just
you meant it. You meant it, and you were just quietly in your mind.
Yeah,
and so
I'm smarter than you think.
I would like to say I knew that, but I didn't. I can't have known that because you're smarter than I thought.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's hilarious. But and what I'll do, and I kind of did this with you because I started you on the protocol. And you didn't get worse, which is awesome because then that means now the protocol. So I'm going to layer in the monolaurin, and then I have another biofilm buster that I use that has EDTA in it.
Okay.
And that will start to chelate out any minerals that are in the biofilm, and that further starts to break down the home where these things are. So now, and then what happens is I have to put you on some herbal approaches that are going to be killing both the parasites, yeast, and bacteria in the small intestine. So we're going to be hitting those, and I got 3 different ones. So we're doing artemisinin, and then we're doing GI synergy, which has a nice synergistic approach to killing. And they have a parasite, a bacteria, and a yeast within that.
So you're hitting all 3. By the way, the artemisinin, because I do so much plant foraging and out in the wilderness. I love to learn about natural ways to get some of this stuff, but that's essentially wormwood, isn't it? Yeah, which grows like weeds outside. So if it was spring or summer, we could have just had a wormwood smoothie this morning. Yeah,
and then you would have been
eliminated
cured.
The need. Yeah.
And so then I'll do, and then in parallel to that, I'll give liposomal glutathione, which will help restore basically the antioxidant and health of the intestines as we're doing this. And then I'm gonna stagger you with a series of different probiotics, and that series of probiotics starts to restore and reset the balance.
Hey, I want to interrupt today's show to tell you about muscle stimulation. You know how you can sit on the couch and watch movies and get a 6-pack? Yeah, that actually works. No, I'm just kidding. It doesn't work that well. Six-pack abs are made in the kitchen, not in the gym. But this idea of electrical muscle stimulation to trigger muscles when you're not able to move, or even when you're watching a movie, or when you're rehabbing a joint, or you want to introduce more blood flow to an area, or you just gotta work on your quads, bro, or your guns while you're driving in your car, which I think is probably illegal, but I'm sure some people use electrical muscle stimulation in their cars. Lord knows we do all sorts of other illegal things in our cars, like glance at our phones. So anyways, this company called PowerDot developed this teeny tiny electrical muscle stimulation device that I almost threw out when I first got it because I thought it was just going to be this cheap ass, little tingly sensation. And I was sore after I used it. It actually works. So it's called a PowerDot. You put the little electrodes wherever you want to target a muscle and grow a muscle or rehab a muscle. And it delivers a shockingly, pun intended, potent electrical muscle stimulation effect. And so a lot of athletes, I found out later, are using this. The NFL, the NBA, the MLB, the NHL, the MLS, Tour de France cyclists, a bunch of CrossFit athletes are using this now. So it's called a PowerDot. I have it in my bag upstairs by the kitchen table, and I'll just whip that thing out and use it whenever I want to trigger muscles when I'm just sitting around, because why not? So powerdot.com/Ben. That sounds weird. Powerdot.com, but that's what it is. Powerdot.com/Ben, and use code BEN at checkout for 20% off. They're giving you a 30-day at-home trial and 20% off. So powerdot.com/Ben. Activate your life today. They made me say that. They said I had to say that. Activate your life today with the world's first smart muscle stimulator. Powerdot.com/Ben. Use code BEN at checkout for 20% off. This podcast is also brought to you by something that you can use to eat giant loaves of bread without painting the back of the toilet seat the next morning. That's right. You can have your gluten and eat it too. I'm not kidding. I actually have a couple bottles of this stuff when I travel anywhere where I know I'm going to punish the bread bowl. Even if I have ultimate self-control, when that bread bowl comes, you're going to take a little bit of that. You're going to dip it in some of that lavender-infused butter and chomp away as you wait for your entree to arrive because you're bored or because the bread's so good. Or maybe you just like to occasionally have some, pasta or spaghetti or whatever. An enzyme called dipeptidyl peptidase will break down the gluten for you. It breaks down the exterior coating of gluten protein. And I'm not saying that there's not still like glyphosate and stuff like that in wheat that could be damaging to you. But if you occasionally just want to splurge on a glutinous item and not get the same type of gut dysfunction that you might get in the absence of dipeptidyl peptidase, you got to try this stuff. It's called Gluten Guardian. Gluten Guardian. Pop a couple, have a slice of bread, slice of pizza. It offers you some protection for that rare glutinous delicacy that you might indulge in. So you go to glutenguardian.com/Ben. Glutenguardian.com/Ben. They're giving all my listeners 10% off. The code is BEN10 at glutenguardian.com/Ben.
Now, question, because I know people are going to ask this. So I'm going to save us some work in the comments section of this show. When you're taking the probiotics, but you're also taking these things that kill bacteria in the small intestine, aren't the probiotics also being killed?
Right. So you're trying to separate them a little bit, and so I'm taking probiotics generally at night.
Okay.
And then I'm just spritzing them through, and at slightly different times than when you take everything else. And then, another thing that you can do is you can take probiotics, and then you can mix them up with saline, and then you can put them in an enema. So then you're getting them straight into the colon.
Yeah, and that's actually what I was going to ask you about glutathione as well, because that fellow we've been talking to, Dr. John Lawrence down in Sarasota, who knocked us both flat on our asses the other day by sending us.
Don't just call him the Sandman.
He's the Sandman. So you guys, I've already talked about John. He's actually going to fly up here next, I think in 2 months, and we're going to record a podcast. But amongst other things, what this doc in Florida is doing is he's making suppositories. He's got like glutathione suppositories, probiotic suppositories. Right. But for sleep, he has this travel hacking kit, and it's essentially intranasal glutathione spray, and then a high dose, like 100 milligram melatonin suppository and a 300 milligram CBD suppository. And last time I was in San Jose, I gave one of each to Matt, and he used them. And it was really funny because we were going to get up and go to the gym the next morning at like 7 a.m. And, I'm texting Matt at like 8:30 with no reply. I didn't want to go upstairs and wake him up because I was just crashing on the floor of his living room. And he woke up, I think, at like 8:39, and we finally headed to the gym. And I think you were literally like falling asleep in the locker room at the gym still.
Oh yeah, I woke up that day. I woke up that day at 1:00 in the afternoon.
Yeah.
But I mean, like I sleep like a baby with no melatonin.
Right.
So like 2 milligrams of melatonin is amazing for me.
Yeah.
Like so that and you know what's interesting? This is an interesting thing in life. As you handed it to me, I looked and I saw that it said the Sandman. Mm-hmm. And then I thought, I wonder what that means. And then I thought, oh, it's from Ben. I'm sure it's going to be fine.
Of course.
But that should have tempted me to ask another question.
And by the way, I wouldn't necessarily endorse using something like that every night, but I'm actually looking, because I just discovered this guide as a positive. I'm going to India in a couple of weeks, so I'm going to take this on long haul travel to kind of reset my circadian rhythm when I get to where I'm going. So anyways, it's called the Travel Hacking. I'll find a link and put it in the show notes for you guys. I think it's called the Travel Hacking Kit. So anyways, you've got, you were talking about how you wanted to do liposomal glutathione or and then the probiotics.
The probiotics,
okay.
Yeah. So now basically we're breaking down biofilms. We're doing herbal approaches to killing. Mm-hmm. And then I'm hooking up with glutathione, and then we're restoring your microbiome through a diversity of different things.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So we've got that whole stack, and that would be considered the Parasite Reset component. Correct?
Exactly, except for the fact that you're going to do albendazole, and you're going to do a course of 3 antiparasitics, and it's only going to be a total of 12 days of treatment. But
and these would be the pharmaceuticals.
These are the pharmaceuticals. And so what that's going to do is that's going to, by a drug mechanism, start to kill those. And what I'm doing with, what I've found is people do way better because that biofilm exists. And what will happen a lot of the times is I'll see people, and when they come in and see me, they said, oh, I saw somebody, I got treated, and then it came back, and then I got treated and came back. And then I'll sit and try to figure out when this happened. And I'll typically hear, like in your case, it's been like 2 years. Mm-hmm. I talk to people all the time, and it's like, oh yeah, I've had this problem for 8 years, 10 years, 15 years. And so it's super important to do this comprehensive approach where you're restoring the microbiome, you're breaking down that biofilm, and you're really comprehensively doing something. And so I started saying this to everybody. I said, we're going to spend 6 months to a year, and you're going to go on kind of a healthier diet, and it's going to be fun. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be awesome.
And not necessarily a healthier, because my diet was already healthy, but more like a diet that eliminates some of the fermentable compounds that, while healthy, such as the wonderful kimchi and sauerkraut we have in there in the refrigerator, or such as, things like apples or onions or garlic. Like we're not vilifying those as being unhealthy, but saying that in the case where you have these type of issues going on, those are giving the bacteria highly fermentable compounds that they can use to multiply and grow. Right.
And then if they grow, then they're starting to release toxins that can have all kinds of side effects. Lipopolysaccharide that gets it creates brain fog, and so we see people with kind of crazy things. And so I kind of approach it as, this isn't the rest of your life. Next year you're going to be able to kind of go out and have a great time, and then even in the short term, let's say in the short term we decide to go back to the Middle East, because I would super like to go there. Then when we are eating that stuff, then we're going to be prepared to be, because if we're chumming the water with that garlic, then what we're going to do is we're going to layer in a bunch of antimicrobials to kill what we brought out.
We can also just do lamb, roast chicken, and tzatziki, and still
have a
pretty good time.
I'd be fine with that.
Okay, so that's the Parasite Reset component, but then there are a couple of other things that you throw in there for what I believe you call your GI reset, and then like this cellular detox type of protocol.
Right. So what happens is so many people they're toxic not just at the level of the gut, but they're toxic at the level of the cells. And so we're trying to help people basically detox at a cellular level. And so I have a protocol that uses the same glutathione, but then we're using a zeolite, and it's a really small form of zeolite that helps shuttle toxins, including mycotoxins, but then also including metals.
BioReset Medical is a medical practice specializing in integrative therapies and advanced wellness protocols. At BioReset Medical, we treat some of the most challenging to diagnose and difficult to live with ailments that people suffer from today, including Lyme disease, chronic pain, PTSD, and mycotoxin illness. Our team has a wealth of experience in advanced integrative strategies to get you to optimum wellness, many of which can be conducted remotely from the comfort of your own home right now. Our team's approach is to use the most non-invasive, natural, and integrative ways possible. Find out how we can help you by reaching out to us at 650-888-7950 or at our website, www.bioresetmedical.com. It's going to be amazing.
And metals, can be a big situation for a lot of people. And so then now you start to shuttle and move toxins and metals out of the cell, and then it moves down a concentration gradient, and then it moves to the liver, and then gets pushed into the gut. And then once it gets pushed into the gut, then we give a binder. And that binder, and we use 4 different binders in our binder, binds onto all of those biological toxins. And one of the other things that it does is it binds onto those mold toxins. So now this is a real important part of this parasite thing. And this I think is going to really make sense to you, because the mold that is living in you was making these mycotoxins. Some of the mycotoxins are just staying in the intestine, and then some of the mycotoxins are getting into your bloodstream, and we found them in your urine. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, the situation with that is if I give you a binder, that binds onto that and mops all of that up. And if I do that, then it's just going to get pooped out in that poop that's the size of your biceps. Mm-hmm. And then that's going to, once I take that away, then your immune system isn't facing those mycotoxins all the time. And so then your immune system is going to stop making antibodies to mycotoxins.
Gotcha.
Now, so a binder is real important. Now, there's a bunch of different binders. There's some that just use bamboo. That I like, and it tends to be clean, but it's not very powerful. Some people like cholestyramine. That's a resin. The problem with cholestyramine is it causes a lot of constipation. And so I've got this clean binder, clean cell detox. So we're starting to shuttle things out and then grab those mycotoxins and pull them out, while in parallel, we're breaking down biofilms, killing everything in there, and then resetting and repopulating your microbiome.
Amazing. I've got a thing for pandas, by the way, so I would have preferred the bamboo approach, but I get your logic.
Okay. I like pandas.
Yeah.
Kung Fu Panda. Is Kung Fu Panda the greatest animation movie of all time?
It's pretty good, but not as good as the old school panda joke where the panda walks into the bar and he saunters up to the bartender and he says, "I'll have a shot of tequila." Bartender, and so the bartender hands over and slides across the counter the tequila, and the panda throws back the tequila, and then he whips out a revolver and he starts blasting around the room. People are ducking right and left, and he's shooting up the bar and shooting the bottles, and shit's breaking all over the place. And then he stands up and saunters back out of the bar, and the bartender kind of comes up from behind the counter, and he looks down at the guy who's down the other end of the bar, who's sitting there watching the whole thing. He says, "What in the hell just happened?" And the guy down at the other end of the bar, he says, "You ever look up a panda in the encyclopedia?" The bartender says, "No." And the guy says, "Panda eats, shoots, and leaves." Anyhow, so you got the cell detox.
That's amazing.
It's a good joke. So you got the cell detox.
I love that. I love that. So then the next thing is energy reset.
Okay.
Now,
energy reset. So far we've got Parasite Reset, we have Cellular Detox, we have GI Reset, and now we get to Energy Reset.
And this may be like the biggest thing that people come to me for, because so many people come with low energy, fatigue, and they're coming because they're interested in NAD, and they're interested in trying to figure out ways to improve their energy. And a lot of people have heard about NAD. And so what we have is a product called NAD Fuel. And what NAD Fuel is has something that drives the salvage cycle that allows you to reuse NAD in your body. And that's combined with trimethylglycine. And trimethylglycine, it has to do with methylation. And so if you want to dig into this, we can a little bit. But
I've actually discussed this on other podcast episodes before. And essentially, in short, when you're using NAD or supplementing with NAD or getting an NAD IV or injection or anything like that, you're upregulating these methylation pathways pretty dramatically. And so consuming a methyl donor like trimethylglycine or betaine or S-adenosylmethionine or something like that, when you're using NAD, will amplify the benefits of the NAD.
Exactly. Now,
see, I paid attention in class.
That's
Doctor.
good. That's really, really good. Now, do you want to digress on that for a second? Because
go for it.
It's amazing. There's a guy named Mansoor Muhammad who I'm working with.
Yeah, he's been on the podcast before.
The guy's
his
a genius.
DNA evaluation. I just finally convinced my dad to test his, because my dad was adopted. I've always wondered on my dad's side, like, what's going on genetically. I want to know. I finally connected my dad with Mansoor, and they're doing it. I think they did a genetic test last week.
Okay, perfect.
The what's it called? The DNA company. It's his company.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll link to my podcast with him too for those of you who want to listen.
So this one's nuanced and interesting because when you drive NAD, then what happens is it turns cell signaling on, and then it does like 50 different things. And in the process of doing all those things, you need to use a lot of methyl groups, and so it uses up a lot of our methyl groups. And so TMG, trimethylglycine, has the least side effects and is the easiest one to kind of onboard people with. Now, what Mansoor discovered is that, and this kind of goes into one of the things that I'm really thinking about within trauma and PTSD in the brain, which we'll get into later, is that he can look at how dopamine works in your brain, and then he can look and see how you metabolize dopamine. Does it hang out for a long time or a short time? Do you have a lot of dopamine receptors or a small amount of dopamine receptors? And then he can look at how methyl donors can affect dopamine, and it'll totally affect you differently depending on how long dopamine hangs out. For example, when you give SAMe. So some people can tolerate SAMe super well. Like, I feel amazing, and so that's an amazing methyl donor for me. Where some people get real anxious and fidgety because of their genetics. And so then the whole genetic kind of interplay is kind of an interesting thing. But what we discovered is we said, we're going to put NMN, which is, I think, the best NAD driver, which is why we call it NAD Fuel. And then we combine that with TMG. And then we combine that with Cell Reset. And what that is that has resveratrol, and it has a whole bunch of sirtuin activators and a whole bunch of mitochondrial activators. And that is basically the fuel to drive mitochondrial biogenesis, i.e. making more mitochondria, and then also helping your mitochondria stay healthy. And then while we do that, the higher levels of NAD are going to have an effect on the nucleus. Mm-hmm. They're going to have an effect on sirtuins. They're going to have an effect on DNA repair, and they're going to have an effect on all of your detox pathways. The other thing that NAD does, and I wanted to kind of talk to you about this. NAD, everybody hears about NAD, but let me tell you this. This is amazing. NAD is in a cycle, and it's constantly being converted into NADH. So the oxidized form is NAD, mm-hmm. and the reduced form is NADH.
Right.
So then in our free pool, we want about a 700-to-1 ratio, because if we have
Of NAD to NADH.
Yeah. And so if we have a high amount of NAD, we can drive oxidation.
Mm-hmm.
And then what that does is that keeps us to have a high charge on our membrane, which allows us to get a lot of stuff done. And that's either on the membrane in the cell or in the membrane in the mitochondria, where our electron transport chain exists. So that's part one. Part two is we have NADPH. We like to have that in the reduced form because it drives antioxidants. And so then you begin to see that in our body, we're constantly driving oxidation to keep our batteries super strong and to drive signaling. But then we're also driving antioxidant pathways. It's kind of like a yin and yang thing, and we're driving them in parallel together. And then as that happens, then the NAD drives our ability to oxidize sugar and turn that into energy in the electron transport chain. And so in our cell reset, we also put in CoQ10 because that's the final electron acceptor and allows you to do that. Now then, what I do is I have all kinds of people who come to see me, and I put them on IV NAD. And IV NAD, if you haven't had it, is probably one of the most transformative things in terms of resetting cognition and life in general. But what I found is when I start to put people on these protocols before, I start to reset their pathways. And then when people come in to see me, I give them this stack, and it helps their body utilize NAD better. And so then they have a more functional experience when they go through the process.
Okay, got it. So that's the cell reset component, is you combine the NAD fuel with the cell, with what's it called?
Cell reset.
Cell reset, okay. And then you also have two other things that you throw into this mix. So now I've got energy reset, GI reset, cell detox, and parasite reset. And then you also have
Mineral reset.
Mineral and sleep as the last two.
Yeah, the mineral reset's easy. And that one, and I use the Quinton sea minerals.
Right.
And
I've talked a lot about those before.
They're amazing.
Oh my gosh.
And so we just do the hypertonic.
Although I pronounce it Quinton, but it's Quinton for those of you looking for it.
How do you say it?
Quinton.
How did I say it?
Quinton.
Quinton. You know what? We're from Montana and Idaho, so probably everybody else is more right than us. But you're probably more right than me.
Yeah. Well, I've progressed from my Rocky Mountain accent to more of a French flair. So I'm gonna go with Quinton.
Nice. Okay, yeah. I'm gonna take
sophisticated.
I'm gonna take that. The French I love. I went to France and I loved being in France, but I kept accidentally speaking in Spanish and I got in more trouble than.
It's a Latin root. It's close.
But so then the hyperton, and the reason I'm doing the minerals is people seem to be real depleted in minerals, and then if you end up getting in a situation like what we're talking about with you, I'm going to have you taking some binders because I want you to bind on to those toxins, but the binders can bind onto minerals as well. And so if I replace those with minerals, that's real helpful.
Okay, gotcha. So people aren't getting mineral depleted when they're on all
while they're going through this protocol. Yeah,
that makes sense.
And so then that's a super easy one. And then if you said, what's the most common complaint that people have when they come in? Other than brain fog and low energy, I would say that it's sleep. And so we got two products. One that kind of helps you go to sleep, that has a little melatonin and CBD and GABA, and then one that helps you stay asleep. And the idea is that you keep that by your bed. And so if you wake up in the middle of the night, you don't want to take an extra melatonin and CBD because you may be a little bit hungover in the morning.
Right.
And so then what you do is you just have
which I've experienced.
So then you just take a little bit of the GABA, and that will help you stay asleep. If you took CBD and you were a little bit too sleepy in the morning, then one thing that can relieve that right away is lemon. Seems to I'll squeeze half a lemon.
Yeah, it's the limonene. You can also use lemon essential oil if you want more concentrated source of the limonene.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. Yep. So you have it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You are smarter than
so
I
that's the sleep reset. You're essentially using CBD with like a GABA, like a inhibitory neurotransmitter, and the inhibitory neurotransmitter is something you'd also take if you wake up during the night.
Right.
Okay. That is a pretty comprehensive protocol. There are probably some docs listening in who are also taking notes, but I know there are also all these, self-quantifying biohackers out there listening in who are going to be trying to, order this stuff off Amazon, find it, kind of piece together their own protocol. I would imagine is some of this stuff things that you would only get through your physician or through obviously the pharmaceuticals, unless folks are using some kind of an online, overseas pharmacy, which is quite dangerous, but I know people do stuff like that. Like, how important is it to have this stuff overseen, and how much emphasis do you place on retesting as you go? And finally, sorry for all the questions, but how many docs know this? Like, how many docs are going to do stuff like this?
So I think the most important thing is to start low and go slow. So we kind of started casually, just you called me at like 11 o'clock at night. And so then we're just kind of chatting. And so then I started with some simple GI stuff, and then we're building in the protocol. And the key thing is not to try to do all of it right away at the same time, because if you do that, sometimes you get a big detox reaction. It's too much and it's kind of overwhelming. My goal of putting this together and kind of putting out a framework of understanding the prebiotic components, the biofilm busting components, the killing components, and being able to wrap all of that into kind of a structure that you can think about is going to allow people to start to biohack themselves a little bit. Mm-hmm. And so all of these supplements are going to be things that you're going to be able to get yourself. Mm-hmm. In terms of And one thing you could do is you could do all of this and you'd be fine as 1.0. Mm-hmm. If that doesn't work, then you can start to go on to like taking antimicrobials and stuff like that.
Right.
But I think it's important to have, if you don't have any experience with this, to have somebody kind of coach you, because often there's somebody could be thinking they're doing amazing, mm-hmm. and they're doing all of this stuff, but they're eating onions all day just because somebody told them to eat onions. They didn't know that one thing. And so kind of having a comprehensive protocol around it. And interestingly, the synergy of this stuff is, for example, if you get your energy working and your NAD levels up, that really drives the ability of your immune system to start to work better. And so mm-hmm. as you put the different pieces of this together, everything helps everything else. If you're sleeping better, your immune system starts to work better. And you've been doing almost all of this, but once we get it kind of dialed in, we're going to heal your gut. And then now we've kind of taken away your number one Achilles heel. And so then you're like, my confidence that you're going to do amazing is super high.
Amazing. All right, you guys. So I'm going to take a brief pause here and summarize for you that in addition to everything that we've just gone through, what I'd like to do, if your game, Matt, is, would you be willing to take like a PDF of this or something like that? Could we put it in the show notes? So people can see this. Yeah. Like the same PDF you sent to me, we could do something like post that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put a PDF of this for those of you who want to review, or maybe even show it to your doctor. If you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI reset, and
the other thing, if you're a doc, and we kind of teach people how to do this, is it works a million times better for me if I have a PDF like this, so it's super organized, and I give it to people, and then they know exactly what they're supposed to do. And the knowledge is power, and the better you communicate this, the better the outcome's going to be.
Okay, got it. So I want to ask you about some other things while I have you as a captive audience at my kitchen table, because there are some other cool things that you're doing. Particularly, probably the three that I think would be the highest priority for us to outline for people on the podcast is A, you had an amazing story you shared with me about how you've helped men who have erectile dysfunction and sexual performance issues, and kind of like how you're approaching that now. So I'd love to hear about that. I'd love to hear about any updates on what you're doing with PTSD and trauma. We've talked about ketamine and things like that in previous episodes, but kind of want to hear a little update on that. And then finally, I want to focus on ozone dialysis.
Oh, cool.
You game to go into those three?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
So walk me through the sexual performance piece and what you're doing now for that.
So the 1.0 is you heard about Gaines wave and you heard about the P shot. I like to break down, if you think about sexual performance, I break it down into 5 categories. So category 1 is people have no problem. Mm-hmm. They're working great. Category 2 is this a small problem, but if you do something, all of a sudden it's working. So it's a small problem, but if you take Viagra, the erection's perfect. Category 3 is that if your hard-on is not good, and if you take Viagra, it's a little bit better, but it's still not fully hard. Category 4 is that no matter what you take in terms of phosphodiesterase type of drugs, nothing happens. Okay. Now, then within category 4, some of what urologists will do is they'll start to give people things that they can inject into their penis. Mm-hmm. And so the first one that they inject is something. You
do realize I'm known as the penis guy now on the internets because I've done these injections, and I have yet to live down the idea of me gallivanting around the globe injecting stem cells into my dick. Yeah. So you're going to make me feel a lot better by being a certified physician on the podcast episode now, actually saying that this stuff is okay.
Yeah, it is okay.
All right.
So then, category 4 is what happens is a lot of times the urologist will give something called Bimix, mm-hmm. and that's an injectable that will help guys get a hard on. People will do that, and then that will stop to work, and then they'll be in category 5. And then they'll be doing something called Trimix, mm-hmm. which is even more powerful. But it creates a lot of scarring and hardness in the penis.
Okay.
And then I guess you could say category 6 is they took Bimix, Trimix, Viagra, and nothing worked, and they don't have any hard-on, and they're at the end of the road. Mm-hmm. And so
I didn't realize guys were going through all of that.
All of that.
So they're doing everything from injections to Viagra to different pharmaceuticals, on, and you are still seeing people who have erectile dysfunction and sexual performance issues even after all that.
Yeah.
Wow.
So one of my a dear friend of mine who's a doctor, who's engaged to a lovely woman who's 30 years younger than him. Comes in and he's in category 6. And so did all of this stuff and was doing the Bimix and Bimix and Viagra had worked for a while. And then eventually that stops working. And then he finally Trimix, and then that stops working. So he came in and he said, I just came in to say hi because I just wanted to have a conversation with you. But I just wanted to see who I should go get my penile implant from, mm-hmm. because I'm going to get implant. Wow. That's the end of the road.
Yeah.
And basically what they do is they tunnel a pump in, and it's plastic, and then they put something that's inflatable in the penis, and then you pump it up and it gets hard. Or they can put a silicone one in. But interestingly, I've never seen it's very common whenever you put implants into the body for them to be contaminated. And Andrew Campbell will talk a lot about this with breast implant illness, where if people have mycotoxins and a lot of chronic infections, a lot of times those mycotoxins will start to affect implants. So this guy didn't really want to get an implant, but he was at the end of the road. And so then it's kind of amazing. So what I started to do shockwave therapy, and then I started to do the P shot. And interestingly, one thing that I figured out is, and if people want to come and learn how to do this, I'll show them. I started using ultrasound when I do my P shot. Mm-hmm. And then I can look into the
platelet-rich plasma shot into the penis using ultrasound-guided imaging.
Yeah, because there's a little tiny artery in the penis, and what I do is I look, and I can, when I put my needle in, I avoid sticking my needle into that artery.
Good.
That's good thinking.
Good thinking.
So then, and what happened right off the bat is when I first started treating him, and I've got a whole bunch of people, like a ton of people in this category of guys in their 70s and 80s. When I first saw it, his penis looked like it was 100 years old. It was gray and super hard because there wasn't much blood flow, and it was all scarred up from all the Trimix.
He had Yoda dick.
Yoda dick.
Yeah.
That's trademark.
TM.com.
But you know what we need to do? We are in the process of turning that from Yoda dick into
Skywalker dick?
Baby Yoda dick.
Oh, baby. Okay.
Is baby? I think Baby Yoda may be like the greatest character of the last 12 months. But anyways, so then it started to look better, but it still wasn't working, which is kind of interesting. And so then what I started doing is I started doing something super amazing called Hydra Dissection, where I would use my ultrasound and I would look at the penile nerves that are on the top of the penis. And then I would go in with my needle and I surrounded those nerves with peptides. And so I surrounded the nerves on the top of the penis with BPC 157 and thymosin beta 4. Now, those peptides are the same peptides that you've used, obviously, for systemic treatment.
Right.
But I found out they work
for joints, for inflammation, etc.
They work great, and I use them in Hydra Dissection and other areas in protocols with placental matrix and exosomes and stem cells. But I started Hydra Dissecting the penile nerves, and then when I did that, all of a sudden he started getting hard-ons again. So he started getting spontaneous hard-ons, and I've done this with other people, and that's been working. Then what I said is, in addition to doing some exosome P-shots, I said, let's start doing some peptides that have a sexual effect, and one of them is PT141. And so this is an injectable peptide that you can give yourself that will help with erectile function. And interestingly, it really helps women for sexual performance as well. And so I have a lot of couples who come who both want to do something. And so then what I'll do is I'll do similar therapies for both of them, and then I'll give them both the peptides. And it's not perfect, but each time I treat him, it's lasting longer and longer and longer. And he's having, like the other day, I said, like, how's it going? He goes, it's not perfect. And I was like, well, how long is your hard-on lasting? He's like, he goes, it's a sprint. I go, how long is the sprint? He goes, half hour. So I go, I'm taking that as a win.
That's not bad.
And and I think that I'm getting kind of another 10% better at this every couple of weeks because we're starting to stack these protocols. But what it begins to show you is that through targeted use of regenerative medicine and synergistically thinking about peptides, exosomes, and different things, and then just like whether we're talking about a joint or a penis, you want to address the nerves. Addressing the nerves is just as important as addressing everything else. And so I'm wildly excited about it.
The nerve hydra dissection, it's absolutely amazing. I mean, I've been down there in the clinic with you and seen people with like severe elbow pain and hand pain and issues completely related to simply moving a nerve around a little bit and then doing like you do with the placental matrix and the exosomes, literally walk out of there completely pain-free. It's
That's amazing.
Yeah, I can't believe how much that protocol in and of itself flies under the radar. But then there's another one that you do that I had done the last time I was your clinic that absolutely blew my socks off, and that was ozone dialysis. Can you tell people what that is?
Right. So ozone dialysis, what it is a form of ozone, and so there's a variety of ways to do ozone. The traditional way that most people may have heard about is something called major autohemotherapy, where about 200 cc's of blood is taken out of the body and some ozone is mixed with it, and then the ozone mixes with the blood, and then it goes back in.
That would be like a 10-pass ozone.
That'd be like a 1-pass.
That'd be a 1-pass, okay.
If you do that 10 times, that's called a 10-pass. Now, then there's the next evolution of this is that you can take blood out and then you run it through a dialysis filter which pulls out a lot of toxins, and so it's a huge detox.
Same thing as you use for like a kidney dialysis, for example.
But then at the same time as you do that, you mix ozone in, and ozone then ozonates the blood, and we have suction coming off, so it pulls off, and it's an incredible detox. But it creates a process where about half the blood in your body gets ozonated. And interestingly, ozone's antiviral, antibacterial, antiparasite, and antifungal. And then the other thing that ozone does is ozone forms lipid peroxides with fats in your blood. And then those lipid peroxides then dissolve into the cell, and then those lipid peroxides drive oxidation reduction reactions. Now, what else drives oxidation reduction reactions? NAD. And so the concept is that ozone can convert NADH back into NAD. And so it begins to optimize NAD levels while helping you fight infections. Now, I like kind of big, sexy, kind of procedurally based stuff, and that's kind of fundamentally where I came to medicine from. But what I found is I fundamentally think that that's not the solution. The solution is functional medicine, because if I don't have all of that dialed in, then the big sexy reboot is not going to last. And so when you came and did it, you felt like $1 million, because what that did is
you were sleeping in the locker room on your melatonin suppository, and I was out crushing the iodine.
You're crushing it.
Yeah.
Because what was happening is I had killed a whole bunch of the bacteria that were part of your biofilm, and I'd kind of reset your intestine. And so then as a result, you weren't dealing with that, and that's how you should be 100% of the time. But for me and if I had that protocol, I would treat you a bunch of times and you would do great. But that protocol is not going to heal your GI stuff. And so then if I step back and I have a full comprehensive functional medicine approach to healing the gut, then what's going to happen is you're going to do 5 times more amazing with
that
ozone
kind
dialysis.
of stuff is like the icing on the cake. Are there many doctors right now doing ozone dialysis that you're aware of?
No, there's not that many of us, but I'm the worldwide trainer for it, so I'm going to be training a lot of people.
So if a doc's listening in, they want to learn more about it, they could go to your website and contact you,
and we're going to teach them
how to do it. Or if somebody wants their doctor to learn how to do it, they could connect their doctor to you.
Yeah, which surprisingly, like that happens to me now all the time. A lot of people come with their doctor. And
so they literally fly out to your clinic in San Jose and they bring their doctor with them.
Yeah.
Wow.
It was amazing. And what happens is, like, they always know like 10 things that I don't know. So like, do you know this? And I'll be like, no. And so then
you're learning at the same time.
I learn as much. I feel like I almost learned as much as anytime somebody comes, I learn the same amount that they do, which is so. Which is why we're getting a little bit better every week.
Right.
And
that's the way I feel about my life, by the way, is like the conversation that we're having. I have 2 of these every week for the past 12 years. And I just get to sit here and learn from amazing people. And like I just feel incredibly blessed, because like I read a lot of books and, and I've done a lot of university coursework, but a big part of what I learned is just sitting here and chatting to cats like you on this show. It's crazy. Yeah.
That'd be a good name for a podcast, Cats Like You.
Cats Like You, or a song.
Or a song.
We'll tackle that later.
But so then now I can do that either through a dialysis filter or through a plasmapheresis filter. Plasmapheresis creates more separation of the plasma component of the blood. And that's where all the antibodies are. And so, but I also get a lot of, it seems to really reset antibody levels. And remember, you were super mold toxic with a whole bunch of mold antibodies. So now as I start to run your blood through a filter, and I start to pull out those antibodies, now that is an immune reset.
Yeah.
So then I've got that going on. Now, that's 1.0. So I've got those 2 ways to sort of reset your plasma. The other way that I have to reset your plasma is that I can do what's traditional plasma exchange, where we take and we actually pull a large amount of plasma off which has all the antibodies, and when we replace that with albumin. And so there are protocols where I start to do a series of either ozone dialysis, ozone plasmapheresis, or traditional plasma exchange. And we're doing all of these and studying that. And what I'm finding is ozone dialysis is so incredibly anti-infectious, and it's just a safe, super easy, almost nobody detoxes. So for example, I had a whole bunch of people who had Lyme who were not working and came in and they started to do the 10 pass or an 8 pass plus all my other IVs of NAD that I give them. And I had a whole bunch of people who were coming once a week. And if they came once a week and got my IV, they could work. But if they didn't come once a week, they were home in bed. Then I started doing ozone dialysis for all those people, and they all laugh and rib me when they come in and they go, guess what? I only come here like every other month now, or I only come every 6 weeks, because ozone dialysis lasts about 5 or 6 times longer than regular ozone. And that's because I'm detoxing and pulling a bunch of things out at the same time that I'm doing ozone. And the ozone seems to be in contact, so I get a better amount of ozone mixing, and I'm able to do it at lower ozone levels than with the 10 pass. So we love the 10 pass, and when we start people, we'll start with high-dose ozone therapy, but we'll start with a 1 pass, go to a 2 pass, go to a 3 pass, and very gently work up, just like our approach to GI reset. And then once that whole thing is working, then we'll do ozone dialysis, and then we'll move on to plasma exchange.
With plasma exchange pretty much being the closest you could get to replicating something kind of like parabiosis or like a young blood transfer. Like you're kind of achieving something a little bit similar with that, yeah.
Well, not really. What plasma exchange, plasma exchange is just pulling off all of the toxicity that's in the plasma and then replacing that with albumin. Now, the interesting thing about that is that albumin is a scavenge, and so then I'm replacing with albumin, that's going to bind onto a bunch of toxins. And then if I do another one, I'm going to pull that out.
Right.
So then the parabiosis thing is the concept of taking either young, i.e. like 18-year-old plasma, or
from an actual donor.
Donor, or umbilical cord plasma. And so that's the kind of the parabiosis thing. I've done that to myself, and it's sort of insanely amazing. But we're not doing that right now, but we're setting up kind of overseas to be able to do that component of it. What I can tell you is
in France.
Perfect. In France, like the French government's like, who are you? You don't know. But
it's okay. I speak Spanish. It's all good.
I'll speak Spanish, and they won't know what I'm saying. So, but the super interesting thing about this is that if I detox you really, really well, that's the best time to put a good input in. And so if I do ozone dialysis, if I do ozone plasmapheresis, or if I do plasma exchange or plasmapheresis, then right when we're done with that, I've really taken all the toxicity out, reset your antibodies. And so that's an amazing time to do something that has a systemic regenerative effect on the body, whether that be a peptide, whether that be exosome, whether that be young blood, whether young plasma or umbilical cord plasma. And so then, but even then, still, I'd rather get the whole functional medicine and get your cells working, get your cells detoxing, and then now you begin to see there's a comprehensive approach to approaching all of your biochemistry.
Got it. By the way, I get the equivalent of a young blood transfer almost every day because I hang out with 2 11-year-old boys.
Yes.
That keeps you young, too.
They're the greatest.
Something to be said for hanging out with children, for keeping you young. Okay, I've got 2 more pretty important topics. What you're doing with PTSD and trauma. I know we've been going for a while now, but I just want to hear if there's any updates, because we've talked already in the past, and I'll link to these other episodes about how you reset the vagus nerve and how you use things like ketamine. But is there anything new that you're doing for PTSD, for trauma?
Yeah, so we will use ketamine. We'll do the vagus nerve Hydra Dissection or the stellate ganglion block. And I'm basically turning the fight or flight nervous system off and then kind of resetting it or using ketamine. But I'm kind of sitting and talking to people and having a kind of a conversation like this. And what I started doing was talking people through how my feeling of how the fight or flight or the rest and relax nervous system relate to the limbic system. And so what I like to say is if you're in fight or flight, then the dominant emotions that you use in that situation are either fear or anger, which are amazing because if the house is on fire, then those are some good emotions that we can use to help get everybody out of the house.
Right.
If we're not in fight or flight and we're in rest and relax, then what we have is the entire limbic system. And so we have the entire nuance of all of our emotions to be able to modulate and handle things. And so then what I'll do is I'll talk people through what it's like to be in that state. And I'll kind of channel how I feel when I'm in rest and relax. And typically how I feel is like just super resilient and safe and calm and comfortable. And so then I'll kind of talk through and I'll say like, I was late, because whatever, we're running late today. And so if you were upset about that, I'm totally fine. Like, I'm sorry if something was wrong, or no matter how uncomfortable it would be, if I'm in rest and relax, I can totally receive that feedback. And so then I'll kind of explain that to them. And then I'll just kind of hang out and start to talk people through their trauma in the rest and relaxed state. And I've just found, and then in parallel to that, then what I'll do is I'll give them NAD. NAD is starting to turn their brain on. And so we're talking and having this conversation. And I've done the cell reset stuff. And so we're giving, their methyl systems are working, their NAD systems are working, and they're sort of, and so all of a sudden as that happens, people will start to turn on their limbic system. And so I'll just sit and kind of talk, and I'll be like, and what I notice is as I do this, then they go into that state. And then while I'm doing it, I'm kind of telling them stories and I'm playing music. And so we're like singing songs. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, that's what I love about your clinic is you show up and there's like country music and there's singing and there's like, what I like about this too is it's kind of like talk therapy combined with tweaking the biochemistry, using things like NAD or ketamine or things like this. You're essentially making someone almost be completely parasympathetically activated at the same time, increasing energy levels and focus so people can talk through a lot of these issues while they're at your clinic.
Right. And so, and I like to talk about kind of whatever happened like in the last week. And so I had like my favorite couple that I've met like in a while come in, and they walked in and they were better dressed than me. I was like, this is a great sign. And I kind of had a sense, there's no problems, everything's going to be perfect. And they were like, we just kind of wanted to talk a little tiny bit about PTSD. And we were fully kind of in this kind of amazing state. And so then, it kind of got to be her turn. And she starts telling me about this unbelievable sexual abuse that started, but like at age 3.
Wow.
And it was so amazing because what I wanted to do was start crying when I heard the story. But then I just kind of like kept talking, and I was kind of explaining kind of the rest and relax thing. And then what I do is I start talking about boundaries and having your own boundaries. And I kind of, I do all this play acting where I kind of pretend like I have a little bubble around me and they have a bubble around them. And it's the best too, because her husband's there. Right. And what happens is, guess what they were here for? Was the whole to do the all these sexual injections and stuff like that for healing. And so then what happens is by being in that rest and relaxed state, and then what I did is I gave them ketamine, but in an extremely low dose. And so it has this psycholytic effect where next thing you know, we're kind of talking and I start to say, we start to practice what it feels like to be safe and have boundaries and kind of like stuff. And so then at the end, she goes, I felt only a tiny bit. I'm not sure what happened. And then the next day she comes in, she goes, I had a dream and I forgave everyone in my family.
Wow.
And she goes, I just hope that this could help someone else. And I go, you know what? I'm going on Ben Greenfield's podcast. I'm going to tell him about this, because what I feel like is all of the stuff that we're talking about, you can get into this rest and relaxed state where you can kind of receive and be kind of in a calm state. You can be with your partner and kind of be in that state together and support each other and kind of support healthy boundaries. And then you can do all of this stuff. So you can turn your NAD on, you can turn these pathways on. And then what I tell people is, I tell people that, and I've been doing this too on the PTSD stuff, which works like amazing, is I say, I'm kind of like your Martin Scorsese. I'm producing this thing, but I'm not too attached to whatever happens. And I know it's going to be kind of entertaining, and I'm going to support you. And that's kind of my boundary, because I'm not going to be too worried if it doesn't work, because I say it's probably, if it doesn't work this time, it's going to work for sure next time. And then that kind of mindset, what I'm seeing is everybody with PTSD is getting better now. And so what happens is, and I just want people who are out there to feel a sense of hope. Like, did I tell you about the guy, my Uber driver? This is the greatest. This is the greatest thing that ever happened to me in my life. I went to a conference in where I was teaching, and I get in the Uber, and the guy goes, "Who are you?" I go, "I'm just a doctor," and going to this meeting. And he goes, "What do you do?" And I told him I did Hydra Dissection. He goes, "Are you Dr. Cook?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "I've been listening to your podcast because I have PTSD, and I know that I'm going to get better." And I go, and so then he goes, "I've been saving money to come see you." And so then I gave him a super.
Wait, he heard you on my podcast?
Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha.
And so he was just saving money to come in.
Yeah, wow.
And so then I said, "Come in," and I gave him a super discount and gave him a stellate ganglion block and ketamine and everything. But I'm probably more passionate about that than anything in my life, because it's just, I feel like it's going to heal the world. And people have the ability to kind of heal themselves more than they realize.
Wow. So many cool things that you're doing. It's amazing. You guys who are listening in, you now know why Dr. Cook is one of my favorite physicians. I just love the blend of the science and the wisdom. And one other thing that we would be remiss not to mention, because by the time this podcast comes out, it's probably going to be ready to hit the streets.
Oh my God. How you buried the lead.
First time ever.
You absolutely buried the lead.
I don't know what you mean.
I think you're going to talk about the band.
I'm going to talk about the band.
The idea is, if you bury the lead, we should have led with that.
Yeah.
But we have it all the way at the end.
We have it all the way at the end. So Matt and I have formed a band together. So Matt loves to sing country music. I love to sing country music. We love old school Willie Nelson and Johnny Cash and Waylon Jennings and all these folks who Matt's singing in his clinic, and I dink around with on my guitar. So we actually recorded an album for you guys. We recorded a 3-song set down in LA in this amazing recording studio, and I think the music's ready for you guys for absolutely free. You can listen to Matt and I sing old school favorites like Cowboys Like Us and Ring of Fire and is it Rocky
Roots.
Well, Rocky Roots is the name of our band, because Matt's from Montana, I'm from Idaho, so we both got roots in the Rocky Mountains. But we have a URL, don't we? I think we got one.
Yeah.
Do you remember what it is?
I really hope it's RockyRoots.com.
I think it's RockyRoots.com. I'm not sure. So anyways, here's the deal, you guys. I'm going to link to our album, assuming it's ready in time, and I think it is going to be out by the time this podcast is released. Any of you want to download our songs and listen to Matt and I singing together and making sweet, sweet country music together down in LA, you can go to the show notes for this episode at bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI-reset. And if you took nothing away from this, from Sibo to sex optimization to ozone dialysis to trauma resets to anything else, you can at least entertain yourself with Matt and I singing and playing to you. And just go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI-reset, and we're going to put our whole album up there for you guys, and you can share that with your friends, listen to it, and
you'll have to know that, like my dad, every time I talk to him, I told you this last night, he goes, Matt, he's real serious. He's, Matty, boy, that Ben Greenfield can sing.
Thanks, Dad.
It's awesome.
All right. Well, folks, wild ride once again with Dr. Cook, and I just really, really hope that this is going to be helpful for any of you who deal with gas, bloating, who are interested in some of these more cutting-edge regenerative medical concepts. If you enjoyed the discussion, I'll link to all my other episodes, 4 other episodes with Dr. Cook. If you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com/GI-reset, Matt and I have a wonderful day plan. We'll probably go for a hike or a walk in the rain. We're going to go hit a little farm-to-table restaurant in downtown Spokane. We're going to mess around with his ultrasound guided imaging equipment he brought up, and maybe we'll shoot some videos for you on Instagram too. If you go to instagram.com/bengreenfieldfitness, there's always some crazy stuff there for you as well.
And then we're going to sing your kids to sleep.
And we sing your kids to sleep every night. So, Matt, thanks for doing this, man.
Oh, thank you so much.
All right, folks, thanks for listening in, and have an amazing, amazing week.
You can find this BioReset podcast and others on iTunes, Spotify, and all other top podcast directories, as well as on bioresetpodcast.com. Make sure to subscribe, and thanks for listening.